What if I told you that the most advanced alien doctors in the galaxy literally fainted when they saw how humans practice medicine? What if I told you that these beings, who could regrow entire limbs with a wave of a device, couldn't handle watching a human doctor use a simple bandage? This isn't science fiction. This is the story of the day. Four elite alien medical professionals discovered that sometimes the most primitive medicine is the most effective medicine. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why human combat medics might just be the most badass healers in the universe. Doctor Gizo stared at the pile of gleaming medical equipment he'd have to leave behind, and he was absolutely furious. This Zarian doctor had spent 43 years mastering the most advanced healing technology in the galaxy. Neural tissue regenerators that could rebuild a brain in minutes. Molecular suture arrays that could seal wounds at the atomic level. Biocameras that could diagnose any disease with a single scan. But the humans? They told him to leave it all behind. Said where he was going wasn't some fancy galactic hospital, but just a medical tent where wounded soldiers needed help after battle. A medical tent, like some kind of primitive field hospital from the Stone Age, standing in front of his mirror, adjusting his pristine medical uniform. Gizo looked every inch the seasoned professional he was. His skin was the color of autumn wheat, that distinctive golden hue of his species. His pointed ears, nearly 6 inches long, twitched with barely contained irritation. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as alien. Two black orbs without visible pupils, just endless darkness that seemed to swallow light. Naked, he muttered to himself. Absolutely naked from a professional standpoint. I might as well be performing surgery with stone knives and prayer beads. The truth was, Gizo had never practiced medicine without his advanced equipment. None of them had. In a civilized galaxy, medicine was precise, clean, technological. You pointed a device, pressed a button, and damaged tissue simply regenerated. Infections were eliminated with targeted nanomachines. Broken bones were mended with cellular reconstruction fields. But humans? Humans apparently did things differently. The airlock chimed, and Gizo picked up his pathetically small first aid kit. As he walked through the transfer tube to the human military vessel, the contrast hit him immediately. Where his ship was all smooth curves and organic design, the human ship was harsh angles and utilitarian gray metal. Everything was reinforced, armored, ready for war. In the assembly area, 3 other alien doctors waited, each looking as uncomfortable as he felt. Dr. Throck, a massive Gamorrean who looked like something humans might call a troll, stood clutching his medical case like a lifeline. Dr. Prillix, an amphibian whose skin glistened with moisture, seemed to be breathing faster than normal. And Dr. Kath, an avian whose brilliant blue and gold feathers seemed to shimmer with nervous energy. They were the best of the best. Elite medical professionals who had volunteered to help humanity in their time of need. And they were all terrified of what they might find. Ambassador Daniel Wilson entered the room with military precision. Doctors, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I cannot express how much your presence means to us. You're the 38th Volunteer Medical Group to answer our call. 38th. That number hung in the air like a challenge. What had happened to the other 37 groups? Your willingness to leave your advanced facilities and work in our austere conditions, Wilson continued, speaks volumes about your character and commitment to the medical oath we all share. Dr. Throck's voice rumbled like distant thunder. We are medical professionals, Ambassador. Our duty transcends comfort or convenience. Though I must ask, why do your people insist on such primitive conditions? Surely the Alliance has access to better equipment. Wilson's smile was tired, knowing, what seems primitive to you has kept humanity alive through centuries of conflict. Doctor, we need first aid more than anything else. Our medical technology may not regenerate tissue or knit bones, but it's quick. And speed means everything when you have a lot of wounded soldiers. Speed over precision. Survival over perfection. These were concepts that challenged everything the alien doctors had been taught. That A.S. Wilson led them through the ship's corridors, The questions continued. What kind of injuries would they be treating? What equipment would they have access to? What were the actual conditions like? Human soldiers are tough, Wilson explained, as are our Death Worlder allies. The injuries you'll see will be primarily physical trauma. Projectile wounds from kinetic weapons, plasma burns, blast injuries from explosives, blunt force trauma from hand-to-hand combat. Nothing your training hasn't prepared you for. But it wasn't the injuries that worried them. It was the methods they'd be using to treat them. The drop pod that would take them to the surface looked less like a medical transport and more like a weapon of war. A brutal cylinder of armor and heat shielding that could, according to Wilson, punch through contested airspace and deliver troops to a hot landing zone under enemy fire. Comforting, Gizo muttered as they strapped themselves into crash couches that had clearly been designed for human anatomy. The descent was 12 minutes of pure terror. The pod bucked and rolled through the atmosphere like a wild animal, its hull screaming as friction heated the armor to temperatures that would melt most metals. The internal temperature climbed past 40 degrees Celsius. The frame groaned and popped as different materials expanded at different rates. This wasn't transportation. This was controlled falling with style. When they finally landed, the smell hit them first. Blood, both human and alien, mixed with the acrid scent of plasma weapons and the indefinable odor of war itself. Fear, sweat, cordite, death, and desperate hope all blended into something that made Gizo's medical instincts simultaneously recoil and engage. The scene that greeted them was unlike anything in their medical experience. Rows of wounded beings stretched across muddy ground that had been churned into a morass by thousands of boots. Some sat on improvised benches made from ammunition crates. Others lay on sleeping bags spread directly on the dirt, their faces pale with blood loss or flushed with fever. There was no organization that Gizo could recognize. No clean triage areas. No separate zones for different types of injuries. No sterile isolation units. Just row upon row of damaged bodies waiting for help. The system is simple, Wilson explained, his voice taking on a clinical tone. Red tags are critical, already inside receiving immediate treatment. Yellow tags are stable, but need treatment within hours. Green tags are minor injuries only. Simple, brutal, effective. As they walked through the waiting wounded, Gizo noticed something that made his chest tighten. The hope in their eyes. These warriors, human and alien alike, had probably never seen beings like them before. But they saw the medical insignia, understood that help had arrived, and that was enough to kindle hope in faces gray with pain and exhaustion. The medical tent itself was a massive olive-colored structure that had clearly seen battle. Its sides bore scars from shrapnel, burn marks from plasma weapons, even what looked like claw marks from something that had tried to get inside. Remember, Wilson said as they reached the entrance, human medicine may seem crude, but it works. Try to keep an open mind. What you're about to see has saved millions of lives over the centuries. Wilson pulled back the tent flap. After you, doctors. And that's when their world exploded. The assault on their senses was immediate and overwhelming. The copper smell of blood was so thick they could taste it. A human doctor was using a manual saw, an actual mechanical saw, to remove a mangled leg from a Marine. The patient was conscious, biting down on a leather strap while assistants held him steady. Blood flowed freely from the amputation site, not contained by any energy field, not absorbed by smart materials, just pouring onto the dirt floor that had already turned to mud from similar procedures at the T another station. Medics were literally gluing wounds closed, squeezing tubes of industrial-grade adhesive directly onto gaping lacerations, pressing the edges together with their bare hands. No cellular regeneration, no molecular bonding, just chemical glue applied to living flesh like they were repairing machinery. Not a Wolverine warrior was having shrapnel pulled from his torso with metal forceps, each piece dropping into a pan with a wet sound. No scanning, no precision extraction, just brutal manual removal while the warrior bit down on his own belt to keep from screaming. By the sacred pools, Dr. Prilix whispered, her enormous eyes dilating in shock. She swayed on her feet, her skin secreting moisture at an alarming rate. Then, with a sound like a wet towel hitting the floor, she collapsed. Doctor Throck lasted 30 seconds longer, watching a human medic cauterize a wound with a heated metal plate. The smell of burning flesh was the final straw. His face went from moss green to sickly yellow. "This is not medicine," he gasped, and 7 feet of Gamorant doctor toppled backward like a felled tree. Doctor Kath remained standing but frozen, her head cocked at an unnatural angle as she stared at a human surgeon reaching into an open chest cavity with nothing but gloved hands. A thin, high-keening sound emerged from her throat. Then her eyes rolled back and she pitched forward, her beak striking the muddy ground with an ugly crack. "Oh, for crying out loud." One of the human surgeons exploded, not even looking up from his patient. "These are supposed to be our reinforcements. They can't even handle the sight of blood. We don't have time for this. We've got 300 wounded out there." Gizo stood among his fallen colleagues, the last one standing. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to flee. His medical training was shouting that everything here was wrong. The contamination, the primitive tools, the brutal methodology. This violated every principle of modern medicine he'd spent decades learning. But then his eyes found a wounded soldier on a nearby stretcher. A human barely out of adolescence, with half his face burned away by plasma fire. The boy was conscious, one remaining eye fixed on the ceiling, tears cutting tracks through the dirt and blood on his face. Waiting, enduring, trusting that someone would help him. And suddenly, like pieces of a puzzle clicking together, Gizo understood. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't about perfect medicine or proper procedures. This was battlefield surgery at its most raw, where the only metric that mattered was survival. The humans weren't wrong. They were just working with what they had. And what they had was keeping people alive against impossible odds. Gizo stepped over Prillix's unconscious form and moved to help his fallen colleagues. "Dr. Prillix," he said firmly, "wake up. We have work to do." Her eyes fluttered open, still dilated with shock. "The conditions, the contamination, are irrelevant," Gizo interrupted. "We're not a hospital. We're in a war zone. Every moment we waste on shock is a moment someone bleeds out." He moved to Throck next, using his medical knowledge to trigger the Gamorant's revival reflexes. "Dr. Throck, on your feet. Now." The massive doctor groaned, his eyes focusing slowly. "The barbarity is keeping them alive." Gizo cut him off. "If you can't handle it, leave. But if you call yourself a doctor, then get up and help these people." Finally, he reached Kath, gently manipulating the nerve cluster at the base of her skull. The aviant's eyes snapped open, her head rotating to focus on him. "I cannot," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Gizo said firmly. "We all can. We must." He stood, addressing all 3 of them as they struggled to their feet. "Listen to me. Yes, this is primitive. Yes, it's contaminated. Yes, it violates everything we've been taught. But look around you." He gestured at the rows of wounded. "Every one of these beings is alive because this system works. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but it works. We can stand here being shocked, or we can help. Choose." The 3 doctors looked at each other, shame and determination warring on their faces. Finally, Throck rumbled, "You're right. We are doctors. What do we do?" Gizo turned to the human medical staff, raising his voice. "We're ready to help. Tell us what you need." Dr. Morrison looked up from his patient, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. "You serious?" "We're doctors," Gizo said simply. "Put us to work." Morrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Barnes, get over here and show these aliens how to use field antibiotics. We'll start them on simple wound closure and work up from there." A human medic approached with an armload of supplies. "Right, listen up. Forget everything you know about sterile procedure. Out here, antibiotics are our best friend. Pump everyone full of broad-spectrum antimicrobials and hope for the best." She held up a tube of chemical adhesive. "This is medical glue. It's not pretty, but it holds wounds closed until we can get them to a proper facility." The next hours were a blur of mistakes and learning. Gizo's first attempt at using the adhesive resulted in gluing his own fingers together. Prillix applied too much and had to cut away the excess with primitive scissors. Throck's massive hands, so precise with proper tools, struggled with the crude instruments, but slowly, painfully, they learned. The human medics guided them with patience born of desperation. Gizo learned to judge the amount of adhesive by sight, to apply pressure just long enough for it to set. He learned to ignore the contamination, to work around the primitive conditions, to focus only on the immediate goal. Stop the bleeding, prevent infection, keep them alive. Hours blended together. The wounded kept coming. Humans, Thraxians, Wolverines, even a few species Gizo didn't recognize. Each one damaged, bleeding, hoping for help. And gradually, the alien doctors found their rhythm. Night fell, though inside the tent it made little difference. The work continued under harsh LED lights. Gizo lost count of how many wounds he'd glued, how many injections he'd administered, how many lives he'd helped save with tools that belonged in a museum. Dawn came gray and unwelcome. Still, they worked. The line of wounded seemed endless, but gradually, impossibly, it began to shrink. Red tags became yellow. Yellow became green. The crisis pace slowed to merely urgent. By the time the sun set again, they were treating the last of the urgent cases. Gizo found himself suturing a relatively minor laceration on a human corporal, his movements automatic after dozens of similar procedures. When the last patient was stabilized, when the immediate crisis had finally passed, the alien doctors found themselves in a corner of the tent, exhausted beyond measure. Dr. Morrison approached, looking every bit as tired as they felt. The anger was gone from his features, replaced by something that might have been respect. "You did good," he said simply. "All of you. We couldn't have managed without the extra hands. We did what was necessary," Gizo replied, too tired for anything but truth. Morrison nodded. "That's all any of us can do out here." He paused, then added, "Thank you." As the human walked away, Gizo reflected on the past day and a half. He'd violated every principle of proper medicine. He'd used tools and techniques that would horrify any civilized medical board. He'd worked in conditions that would have shut down any proper facility, and he'd helped save lives. Hundreds of them. The soldier he'd sutured would have a scar, but he'd live to see his family again. The Thraxian whose arm he'd helped amputate would receive a prosthetic, then a new limb later. The Wolverine with a belly full of shrapnel would heal and fight again. They were all alive because human field medicine, primitive as it was, worked when nothing else was available. "I need to sleep," Prilix murmured, her voice slurred with exhaustion. "And then a proper shower. And then perhaps a memory wipe." "Agreed," Throck rumbled, "though I think I understand them better now." The humans. Kath clicked her beak softly. "We have much to report to the medical council. Our textbooks may need revision." Gizo nodded, too tired to speak. All he wanted was to return to his ship, to sleep in his proper bed, to pretend for a few hours that he hadn't just spent 2 days practicing medicine with stone knives and chemical glue. But underneath the exhaustion was something else. Satisfaction. Pride even. He'd faced the impossible, and he'd learned. As the alien doctors finally stood to leave, supporting each other on unsteady legs, Gizo took one last look around the field hospital. It was still primitive, still contaminated, still everything his training said medicine shouldn't be. But it worked. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The most advanced alien doctors in the galaxy had learned something that day. Sometimes the most sophisticated medicine isn't the most effective medicine. Sometimes when lives hang in the balance, the difference between life and death isn't about having the best equipment or the cleanest environment. Sometimes it's about having the courage to do whatever it takes, with whatever you have, to keep someone breathing for one more day. The humans have been doing exactly that for centuries. And now, 4 alien doctors understood why humanity had earned its reputation as the most stubborn, most resourceful, most impossibly tough species in the galaxy. They didn't just fight to win. They fought to survive. And they turned that survival instinct into an art form that could teach even the most advanced civilizations a thing or two about what it really means to heal. That's the day 4 elite alien medical professionals discovered that sometimes the most primitive medicine is the most human medicine. And sometimes being human is exactly what the galaxy needs.